Welcome to LiberTea, the videocast series of the European Liberal Forum. I'm your host, Ricardo Silvestre. Thomas Jefferson said, "All liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without being lost." Alex de Tocqueville said, "I avow that I do not hold that complete and instantaneous love for the freedom of the press that one accords to all things unqualifiedly good. I love it out of the consideration for the evils it prevents, much more for the good it does." And then Albert Camus say, "A free press can of course be good or bad. Most certainly without freedom, the press will never be anything but bad." And to talk about the importance of a free media, I have the right person with me, which is Peter Laroy. Peter, thank you so much for coming to the videocast.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for the invitation. You're welcome.
Peter is the director of Liberas, the Heritage Center for the History of the Ideal of Freedom. Liberas is the reference point for the history of the liberal movement and the freedom ideals in all its facets in Belgium and Flanders from the beginning of the 19th century to the present. And Peter, I'm in the right place to talk about the freedom of media because in a recent past, a liberal press regime of the young Belgium nation state was famous all over Europe. In fact, it was very interesting that in the constitution of neighboring countries, freedom of the press was included much later. So in a way, we are in the epicenter of freedom of the media that exported not only to Europe, but wherever to the world. So tell us about that.
That's right, Ricardo. I do think so. Belgium was one of the states in the 19th century who was really a front runner, a forerunner in freedom of the press. Belgium became independent in the 1830s, and in our constitution there was already really mentioning something about the freedom of the press. It said the press is free, censorship can never be introduced. And that was really important for the Belgians. They thought out some kind of liberal vision also at that moment. They were thinking, yes, we have to get a free press, a free speech, because it's important for our citizens to say what they want and to react against a powerful state, perhaps. There is always a counter force, and that counter force could be the press.
And a follow-up on that, because I was very interested with the fact that it was born here and then it starts spreading across Europe. So do you think that those values that you just mentioned, they were a copy as a good practices to other countries, or there were natural shifts regarding communities, regarding what kind of liberties, what kind of governments we had around Belgium?
I think it's a combination of some evolutions in history. You had the growing states in Europe. They became stronger states, and they were inspired by the Belgium example. That's true, but there was also a kind of natural evolution because of liberal philosophers or by new ideas that were living in societies. The nations saw, the people saw, they had to follow the ideas of Belgium.
So exporting a good idea.
That's right, yes.
That was working for other people because of the benefits. Yeah. Peter, this is fascinating, but still, not all freedoms are complete freedoms. There are limitations to freedom. So you as an historian, give us a little bit of a perspective of the path that we rode to get here regarding exactly how free is freedom of the press.
Yes, well, we know in the 19th century also freedom of the press was not regarded as an absolute right. That's true, because our state, the legislator, determined that a press offense was committed if freedom of expression was abused, and if this was distributed by means of mechanically multiplied documents, they said. So there was something like inciting a crime or publicly attacking the authority of the law or attacking the constitutional authority of the king at that moment, or parliament in other systems. It was punishable, even if there was a system of free speech. So we have to keep it in mind that this right of free speech is not always an absolute right, and that's the same at this moment, I think.
That's a great point, Peter. Now, moving to a larger context, once that this episode could be seen in anywhere in the world, you, as someone that is working to preserve the history of media and also to promote the idea of a free press, so important for us liberals, how do you see nowadays the importance of free media in modern society?
I think there's said something about the law and the legislation in the 19th century, but there's also something like society. And I think we see in history that ideas and views about free speech are being resetted by societies. And nowadays, some kind of ideas that were free speech in the 19th century are no longer free speech at this moment, and in reverse. Some things we thought in the 19th century couldn't be said are now common spoken things, I would say. So there is always a tension between the law and the principles, the abstract philosophical principles, and then the reality of our society. And as our society is evaluating, the decades from the 20th century are no longer the decades of the 21st century. And so we are adapting also our ideas of free speech to that way. And that's for me really fascinating, because as a historian, I think at this moment it's always going faster and faster. Also the society as a whole,
Yes.
but essentially also the idea of free speech. And we see something at this moment. You have extremes that are coming up. Extremes are coming up in society, but also extreme thinking about free speech. There are, on the one hand, there are people that say everything is free speech.
Yes.
And on the other hand, people say, no, we have to restrict the open ideas. And the middle is always, it's becoming more or less in the middle, I think, at this moment.
So it's a great point, and marketplace of ideas, it's a concept that was introduced particularly by US law and the Supreme Court in the United States. As liberals, we tend to think about the market regulating itself. In here, the market of ideas also regulated itself. But as you said, and very correctly so, there got to be laws. Now, my question to you and for our viewers that could be seeing this in anywhere in the world, what is your concern that the laws start stifling too much free speech? Specifically laws, and you just mentioned the king, the government, laws made by the state. So what is your take on that?
Well, that's the thing about making a law, is a principle of our societies, as I said. And each society has a different view, each system has a different view, and free speech is typically something about our liberal democracy. It comes out with our liberal values, our ideas of society. It's about democracy. Democracy and free speech are friends, and in reverse, free speech is not really a friend of the less democratic regimes. So there's a danger in the state controlling the free speech, but on the other hand, there has always to be some kind of guidelines. Yes. You have to design a kind of field, like a football field. You have to take some lines. You stay behind it or you go out of it. And some countries have a more little play field than the others. There are guys who play on a tennis field, and there are some states who play on a football field. Yes. That's some kind of idea.
Well, Peter, sports analogies are always welcome here in the videocast, but there are some worrisome signs. For example, Reporters Without Borders have shown that there was a decrease of 12%, this is in 180 countries, in the index of media freedom. And 13% of those countries are in a very bad position. also Freedom House show that even influential democracies, populists are trying to stifle free press, something that you mentioned just a minute ago, Peter. So from your vantage point, how do you see then this attacks on free media, this trying to stifle the freedom of journalists to do their work?
I think optimism is a moral duty. We have to be optimistic, not only pessimistic, but there is also a kind of realism. There are things happening now with our free speech. We see it when you check at some websites that are observing what's happening about free speech. They give statistics, but they give also some cases that are very worrying here in Europe. Yet there are some really realistic cases. You can see it that some all kind of things that are very astonishing when you read the cases. Yes, it's kind of a clock that's working. It's go like on the playground. It's go on the left and it goes on the right, and it's constantly moving. And in some countries it's going very slow, and in other countries it goes tick, 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 tick. So I think some kind of evolutions we see at this moment in the world, in Europe, that's part of the historic game of the historicity in our world. So I think there are moments when the press is the free speech is under pressure, and at other times it goes back because there are always the citizens, the people who influence the free speech. But at some times when you live in the times, when free speech is under pressure, it isn't easy to push the pendulum, the clock to the other side. But I think that's really something we have to accept, that it goes one way to another, and it's our duty as citizens to work on it. I think we as citizens have a duty to help other people, other citizens who are under pressure, to go for that free speech.
So it's interesting, Peter, what you're telling us is that as an historian, you see this happening, and for people that are outside that world, everything looks like it's the first time that is happening, and it's the worst thing that is happening. So that's a little bit of the experience that you have, right?
Yes. But there's one thing I have to say. I said we have to be optimistic, but there's also, when I think about the evolution at this moment, of course we have all those digital technology. And as a historian, I was thinking in Belgium and in other countries in Europe, there was a problem with the free speech during the world wars we had here, during the war years in Belgium. And then people were still able to print some illegal press papers, because they had in their garage or things like that. In schools there were little printing machines, old printing machines, even out of the 19th century, but they were working because they were mechanical, and you need only some ink and paper, and you could print your ideas. That's now at the moment a different case, I think, because we are also dependent from our technology.
Yes.
And yes, we are used to the social media, to Twitter, to Facebook, to our websites, but they are all controllable, more controllable than in the past. And that's, it's the future, the digital thing, I'm sure. But for the free speech, that's really a problem. As a historian, I think it's all more controllable. I imagine if there would be tomorrow a war and we have to fight for our ideas and our free speech, and there is a person who say no more Twitter, no more Facebook, no more Instagram. How can we communicate? Yes, we can speak. Even I thought about it. The worst thing we could do, or the best thing we could do, is write by the hand and give the papers through each other. And then I think oh, that looks like back in the Middle Ages, and that's something that worries me when it goes about when we're talking about free speech. There are opportunities in our digital society, but there are also some threats at this moment, and we have to be aware of it. That's a limitation.
It's a great point. We could have an entire episode just about freedom of speech and freedom of the media and social networks. But one of the things that we see actually was the advent of internet and of digital news emptying out, hollowing out a little bit the media, the traditional media. But again, this is for a new episode. Peter, as we're getting to the end of our time together, and thank you so much for having me here at Liberas Center. This has been a great experience to be here with you. But now let's talk about something really important. That is, what can we do? What can be done? For example, institutions like the European Council, the European Parliament are setting some rules, some guidelines to protect free media. But someone like you that works with the concept that media should be free, tell us some solutions to preserve this so very important freedom.
Yeah, well, I've seen all the things the European Union does. Indeed, there are the guidelines. There are many pages on the internet about free speech on the websites of the European Union. Yeah, it's really a good thing, but that's something more theoretical. We all have to do our own things. As I said in the beginning, there is also our inspiration as a citizen, our motivation as a citizen. We have to fight for it because every day you have to do it. That's if you want to lose some weight, as I like to do, you have to work for it. And that's the same thing with free speech. If you want to have free speech for the future, we have to work for it, to look at it. And the smallest thing, and that's in the case when you eat a little cookie, it can be dangerous for your weight in your program to lose weight. That's the same. Even the smallest things in free speech, you have to regard it and to be aware of it. That could be a danger for the future. Yes. And that's really a problem because sometimes as a citizen, as a society, we think, oh, it's a small thing, but a little snowball became once a big snowball and an avalanche, something like that. So that's really, we have to be aware of the problems, the freedom, the free speech, something to work on every day.
But grabbing what we were just talking a minute ago, and you were saying about some of the recommendations from the European Council and the European Union, those are good ones, like, for example, best practices, increasing literacy, which I'm sure is something that you appreciate tremendously. For example, more access to media outlets. But there was one in particular that I really wanted to talk to you, and for example, the European Parliament, that is discussed often, which is to promote independent media. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and independent media, that's also a thing that's very important at this moment. It's already for some years going on that media groups are becoming bigger and bigger. It was first on the scale of a country, then on the scale of Europe, then now it's a world scale, and that's really a dangerous thing, dangerous evolution. And as I said, with once we had the idea, when the internet started, everyone could become a journalist or a reporter and bring things out. That's not always what we like, because a journalist normally checks his facts and things like that. And when everyone is a journalist, we write and there's no checking. That's also a problem. But we have to invest in a higher level, indeed, of the citizen journalist, the liberal journalist who is thinking and who works in fact-checking. It's very important, and that's indeed a thing that independent companies, smaller companies, I think, independent, it's also a big deal about independency and small and bigger and things like that. I think it's a good thing that the European Union is going to support more independent media. Yes.
It's a great point, Peter. And to our viewers, one thing that I can also recommend, and I do it myself, which support your local media. So if you have a paywall, if you can buy the newspaper from your local town, do that, because as Peter was saying, this agglomeration of media just gives one voice, just gives one editorial content. So support your local media. So Peter, as we are running out of time, and this has been an amazing conversation, thank you so much for talking to me. We are at the amazing Liberas Centrum in Ghent. You were so kind to receive me here for this conversation, and I have more than fascinating with your centrum. This is great, and again, anyone that could be in Ghent for visiting this wonderful city, please come and visit the centrum. So tell us a little bit what you do here.
So Liberas is essentially an archival institute, and since 1982 we are documenting the liberalism in Belgium. In Belgium we have two languages, Dutch and French, so our documents are in those languages, and we are harvesting those documents long way ago. And at this moment, it's not only the political party we are documenting, but also cultural organizations with liberal views. Sports clubs have liberal views, because that's due to the pillarization. That was a long time thing we had in Belgium. Pillarization was you had some ideology, or a liberal, or a socialist, or a Catholic, and once you were in one pillar, it was from your how do they say, from cradle to grave?
Yes, cradle to grave.
From
yes.
cradle to grave, that was. So we are documenting those things. It's not only documents, not only paper documents, but also photographs, other objects, coins, flags, a lot of things like that. And we use it not only to archive it, but we also promote it to the public, to historians, to social scientists who want to research the liberal ideas, the liberal parties, the liberal organizations in Belgium. So it's a kind of everything. We have about 10 kilometers of archive at this moment stored in our depots. And now, the last years, we are also working on our digital archives. Mm-hmm. So we are harvesting websites, we are harvesting social media, we are receiving files from liberal politicians, liberal organizations, and we store it safe for the future. And that's not only because the world, by using the digital thing, the world has gone open. So we are also open for all kind of liberal organizations from out of Europe, really out of the world, to store their digital documents in the future in our server rooms. That's the future for us.
Indeed, it was a great pleasure to be here at the Liberas Center. Peter, tell our viewers how they can follow the work online, of course, but again, if you are in Ghent, please drop by. Yes,
you're always welcome here in our building in Ghent, but mostly you can follow us on our website, liberas.eu. So we have chosen for EU to show our European spirit.
I'm going to put the links to the Centra, but also other ways to follow, for example, on social networks. They're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, and all this will be on the description of the video. I've been talking with Peter Laroy, the Director of Liberas, the Heritage Center for the History of the Ideal Freedom. Peter, thank you so much for having me. This was a fantastic conversation.
Thank you very much, Ricardo.